Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today from wherever you are. My name is Rosemary Tg. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Claris, and I'm your host for today's Claris Connect Custom Connectors Workshop. This exclusive workshop will deliver practical instruction on the integration of third-party APIs and equip you with the tools you need to link crucial applications and services more effectively. We have an action-packed session, so let's get started. And now it's my pleasure to hand the presentation over to Ronnie Rios, Product Manager for Claris Connect, to take a deep dive into custom connectors. Take it away, Ronnie.
Thank you, Rosemary. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm really excited to be talking about one of my favorite features of the entire Claris platform, and definitely my favorite feature of Claris Connect, which is custom connectors. We have some great content here to share with you here today, so let's jump right in. All right, so today I'm going to quick rundown of the things that we're going to be doing. I'll give a quick overview of Claris Connect and what custom connectors is as a feature. We'll start diving in right away into creating a custom connector directly from a template. It's a very quick way of creating custom connectors. And then we'll do a deeper dive into creating a custom connector completely from scratch. Now, you'll be able today to follow along and create these connectors along with me if you want to. We'll be posting some information in the WebEx chat that you can use to test these connectors out as you build them. But if you have any questions, I'm going to post them and we'll try to answer as many questions at the end. Again, you don't have to follow along, but if you can, if you have access to and can, please follow along and get a lot more out of this. So with that, let's dive right in. So for those of you who are might be new to Claris Connect, I'd like to talk a little bit very briefly about what Claris Connect is. So Claris Connect is a cloud-based integration platform as a service. And that as a product, really, it's focused on allowing you to be able to create entire workflows by connecting applications. It's really focused on allowing you to create full integration in a matter of minutes, not days, bypassing a lot of the complexities that are involved in creating API integrations and building entire workflows with a very simple user interface that easily connects software and services to automate those business workflows. Now, there's some key concepts that it's really important to understand before we get into Claris Connect. And so let's talk a little bit about them. The first one is the concept of flows. Now, flows are, by definition, a sequence of steps that are triggered by an event. So think about flows. If you're familiar with FileMaker, kind of like scripts, right? So it follows a sequence of steps of actions that are in there, and it's going to be waiting for an event, and that event that's going to trigger that flow is aptly named trigger. So trigger is that event for which Claris Connect is going to be waiting or listening for, and whenever that event happens, it will start to execute the steps in that flow. So actions are steps in that flow that carry out operations, usually around the target for the target application that you're trying to integrate with. And usually these operations are things like, reading and writing data to that third-party application or data source. Now, there's also the concept of step data. And step data is the data that's output from trigger or action steps. And this data can be used later on by any other subsequent step as input for those steps. So think of step data as kind of like variables that you don't have to declare, and you can reuse the data that comes out of any particular step and then later on in any of the other steps, again, as input. So it allows you to really create a powerful business logic into those flows. And the final concept, right, kind of the star of the show, is connectors. So to define connectors, they are, simply put, they are components that facilitate the integration between apps or data sources. So think of them as, software components that facilitate the communication between applications. It hides the complexity of directly interfacing with APIs, and it eases the exchange of data. It really handles all the tasks that are associated with integrating with API. So things like the authentication, the calling the API endpoint, and even error management. So connectors in itself, the way we have them here, they expose the underlying API of that third-party application through those triggers and actions that we just talked about. It's good to note that not all connectors have triggers or have actions. Sometimes they'll have only triggers, sometimes they'll have only actions, and that all depends on the underlying API and the things that are that we want to build into those connectors. So simply put, connectors, they enable easier and faster integrations with those applications. So with that out of the way, let's talk about then custom connectors, right? Well, custom connectors is a feature inside of Claris Connect that allows you to create your own connectors. So why would you want to create your own connectors? Well, the things that we keep on hearing from customers is that, one, that you may not want or can't wait for us to build a connector that you need. You may want actions that are beyond the ones that are built into the library connector, the built-in connectors that we have, right? So we don't expose all of the endpoints of that underlying API. You might have access to other endpoints, and you might want to have a reusable way to integrate with other systems that maybe they're internal or they're custom or they're very niche or regional systems that we may not have access to, and you really need to do those integration and have a much better way of doing those. So specifically in custom connectors in Claris Connect, we try to make this as feature-rich as possible. So let's talk a little bit about some of those key features in custom connectors. We'll start off by saying that custom connectors in Claris Connect, you create those connectors by using just JSON. And so you don't really need to know how to code in, say, JavaScript or Python or anything like that. What we use is we use JSON as a way to describe the connector. So JSON is a data formatting. It's an expression of data, right? So you can format data. And so we're using a particular schema of JSON to be able to describe the connector itself. So there's not really logic built into this, and there's no programming there. Now, all the tools that you're going to need are already available inside of Claris Connect, completely in the browser. So one of the great things that we really want to focus on is make sure that you had all the tools that are completely available there. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to install anything. Everything that you need is built in there. And that includes tools for testing and debugging. So even for troubleshooting and trying to figure out things, because as you go along, right, integrations and APIs can be complex. You want to be able to have the tools that let you know what's going on and if something's going on and how to fix it. The other great thing about custom connectors is that they are immediately available. So everything you built will be ready to use right away. There's no waiting period. There's no submissions and things like that. You can start using those connectors right away. And the other thing is that we've built in also several sample connectors for you to go through, use them as learning or maybe starting points. You can use them as is. We've got sample connectors built off of some of our built-in connectors, which is great. So you can take those, customize them, add new actions if you want to, make whatever modifications you want, and re-release them internally as your own connectors. So it's really great to get up and running. All right, so before we get further, I just acknowledge some of the things that you're going to want to have a handle on as far as knowledge before you dive into creating your own custom connectors. So custom connectors does require some basic knowledge, again, of JSON. JSON is an data exchange format. So you'll have to know just some basic knowledge here of JSON. You'll have to know a little bit about the API that you're trying to connect to. So access to the documentation of that API is very important. It's good to understand the different types of what an HTTP request is and kind of the different types are, like with the methods, just basic understanding of what those things are, and some basic understanding of the authentication and authorization methods that your API is going to be using. Most of those things are already inside of the documentation for that third-party API, but you'll want to be able to read up on those and have a basic grasp on what those methods are. All right, with that, I'm going to get started, give you a quick tour before we get our hands dirty on custom connectors. We'll go over some kind of features very quickly, just to give you guys just a very brief tour walkthrough of custom connectors. So the custom connectors features, if you log into Claris Connect, is exposed through a new tab that we have here called custom connectors. And here's where you can see all the connectors that you and your team have built. You'll see both the ones that you've published and the ones that you're still working on. The ones you're still working on, you'll see have that little label on the top that says draft. That means you guys are still working on it. You can go in and still make modifications for it. Now, if you want to create a brand new connector, then you click on the button here on the top left to create a new connector. And this brings us into the custom connectors editor. And you can see we kind of pre-fill it here with some JSON. It's kind of a template for you to get started. You can go in here and start making changes right away. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this editor because it's really cool. It's pretty smart. It can actually detect errors. So you can see over here, it knows that there's something wrong with this data. It's supposed to be a string. I made a mistake over here. And it actually even tried to make corrections. So if I go ahead and put double quotes over here, hit return, it'll fix that for me. It also validates for JSON. So if I break this JSON by removing, say, a comma, it'll let me know what the error is and where it believes it's at, so I can go fix it. It also has type ahead functionality, which is really cool. It is aware of the schema. So for example, as I start typing one of the attributes for a connector, it can autofill that and autocomplete that for me. And it's consistently validating, right? Constantly validating everything I write, make sure that everything is correct. So if I put anything here that's wrong. Now, again, you can write your connector completely from scratch, and we'll see a little bit about that. But like I said, we have some sample connectors here, there as well. And so you can choose any one of these. These are taken from our built-in connectors. So you can say, for example, here, the WordPress one, this is exactly our connector expressed here in the custom connector. You can see the entire thing. We've got several others here. We've got, Clearbit, Crunchbase one I use a lot, playing around with. And you can go in here and make modifications. You can make any one of these your own and customize it. You can even point it to other APIs, so it can be great as a starting point. But at any point here, you can start then testing it. And we allow you to, we've got functionality here to test both the authentication. You can see here the response from the API, but also you can send the request. You can see the request, which is extremely important to see what Claris Connect sent over to the API is almost more important than to see what the response is. You can also test the action. Not only can you see the request and response, but this is the way that the user will see it in a flow. So it's really great to be able to kind of look at that anytime. And anytime you can go out and you can come back in and continue modifying, so you don't have to create the connector all at one go, which is really great. Come back in here and still modify this draft version. And again, if I'm comfortable with like how everything is and maybe already tested it, then I can click here on publish and then make this now an official connector. You'll see here the icon is slightly different. I can still go into this connector. I can see the JSON definition. I can copy it. And this is one of the great things of having these definitions as JSON. I could copy and paste it, email it to somebody. But this connector is now completely available for me and my team. I can go into any of my flows or brand new flows, and you'll see that we got a new section over here at the top for custom connectors. And I can choose it and use it just like any other regular connector in the platform. You'll see how it shows up here. The authentication works exactly as one of the native connectors, one of our built-in ones. And I'm just going to quickly test this one here that we just created. There you go. It works. Just like any other connector, it becomes available and I can start using it in my flows immediately. So as a quick tour of custom connectors. And so now what we're going to do is we'll get started. Let's get our hands dirty. Again, if you can follow along, please log into Claris Connect. Let's get you started into the custom connector tab. And then we'll be posting here in a second some information that you can use for this. I'm going to bring up here the chat and make sure that we've posted the information that you need. 1 second. All right. I'll ask Rosemary, could you make sure that the information is posted in the chat for them? And all right, let's get started then. All right, so once again, if you can follow along with us, start over here in the Custom Connectors tab inside of Claris Connect. I want to do a really quick connector. We're going to start creating a connector from a template, right? It's the easiest way to get started to create a custom connector. So, let's see. Two. Looks like my screen's not working. There we go. All right. So let's get started over here. If you're, again, following along, starting here in the Custom Connectors tab, we're going to start by clicking on the Create a New Connector button on the top left. Again, it's going to bring you here to the Custom Connector Editor. There's some kind of boilerplate JSON that's over here. Don't worry about it. What we're going to do is going to go here to the sample dropdown, and you're going to, let's choose here the Google Maps one. I think it's one that most everybody understands. It's pretty easy to get. And you can make some small changes here. I would suggest like changing like maybe just the name, something like that, just so you can see it later on once we publish it. And once you've done that, we'll wait here and click on the Save and Test button on the bottom right. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to test this out. We're going to test the authentication. So the first API key of what we posted here in the chat, you can take that API key. That's for Google Maps API. So if you copy that and paste it in here, if you don't have an API key for Google Maps, and then click on the test button. If everything goes fine, you should get a response similar to this. You get a response back from Google Maps. You should get a status 200. And then over here, again, you can see the request, you can see what it looks like, what we sent over from Claris Connect, and then you see the response back from the API. And we can go ahead and test also the action. I like to test the get coordinates from an address. Just type in any address you want. I'm in New York, so. And then click on test action. And it should bring back, again, status code 200, get some response there, and you can see the request once again. There, I'll let you catch up. All right, then once you feel comfortable with it, we are all good. We click on the Publish Connector button. Click on Publish, and that connector should show up here in your Custom Connectors tab with the name that you gave it. And we can go ahead and test this out. We can go into any existing project or a new one, go into a flow, and add it as an action. And it should show up over here. If you're creating a brand new flow, remember we only have actions here, so you'll want to create a trigger first, and then add this as an action, and then you can put the API key and test it out, and it should work. And you should get a response similar to this if you test it out in the flow. Awesome. So if hopefully you're able to follow along and be able to create that. If you did, awesome. You've just created your first connector. And it really is as easy as that. So you can use any one of the built-in connectors, make modifications to it. You can use it again as a starting point to make your own version of one of those connectors. Or if you want, you can point it to a different API and make a brand new connector for a completely different application. So that is a great way of getting started just by using a template. But now we're going to dive a little bit deeper, and we're going to create a connector completely from scratch. So first thing that we need to do is we need to get information from the API, right? The documentation for the API that we want to build the connector for. So let's say for this example, we are going to build a custom connector for OpenAI. It's become very popular application, and their API is very well documented. So it should be really fun to be able to create a connector for OpenAI. We already have a connector in Claris Connect, so you can kind of cheat if you want to. You can take take the template from there, but also in the chat, the link that we posted there will have the entire definition of what we're going to be writing here. So at any point along the way you get stuck or have any errors, you can download that file, and has the complete connector there that we're going to be building here today. So if you want to compare with that version, if you get stuck along the way. All right, so let's first start looking at the documentation for this API. So the first thing we want to know is we want to understand how this API authenticates. And so this is directly from their OpenAI's website. We can see here that the authentication happens through an API key. So what you need to provide the API is just a simple API key, and the way that is sent is through what's called an authorization bearer. So it means that inside of the header, all you have to do is include an entry here for authorization bearer to bear type of authorization. Very, very common for a lot of the APIs, and all you have to do is include the API key in there. So it's fairly straightforward, but it's something that we need to understand in order to create our own version of this connector. The next thing is here just a very quick example of what a normal request, right? A request to an API call might look like. So over here you can see that it looks like this. You can have the endpoint over there. You have the authorization portion there, and then if you want to send any data to it, it goes in as a JSON object included into this request. So this is important for us to know as we start building our connector, because this is a piece of information that we'll have to refer back to as we start as we build the connector. So let's we'll have to create an action for this. And so I've chosen this endpoint. It's a fairly straightforward one. It's the completion one. It's very popular. As you can see at the top, it says it's this particular endpoint. We call it through a post method. So the HTTP method type of request is going to be a post. And you see the URL that's there on top. This creates a completion. So you give it some text and try to complete that. It has, as you can see there in the request body, there's a bunch of different parameters that we can send to it. But two of those parameters are required. So the model and the prompt, which both are string, are required parameters. There's a bunch of other ones, but I think for our example, we'll just limit it to model and prompt, and we'll add a third one just to see what that looks like. We'll add the max tokens, which is it's basically a number that specifies how many things, how many tokens, how many words do we want it to send us back. And you can see it's optional. So we'll see what these things look like as we built the connector. All right, so we've already seen that the connector, as we in the examples that we were working on just now, it's all in JSON, and it actually follows a pattern. You probably notice how it follows a particular structure for that JSON. And so that's what's called the JSON schema. So it follows a particular structure and how you define it. And these are kind of the high level, these are the main parts of a custom connector as far as the JSON, right? So there's all these different sections. I'm going to walk through each one of these. Now, from this point on, I'm going to be going back and forth between here kind of the slides and the Claris Connect documentation. So if you want, you can go to the documentation side, and every bit of information I'm going to show you here is there. I'm going to reference that so we can read back and forth and go through each one of these sections of the JSON schema. So the first portion of this is going to be about schema. It's about the metadata, I'm sorry. And the metadata is those pieces of information that give the kind of the name of the connector, the description, and things like that, right? So they help describe at a high level the connector. So let's get started. going to go over here to our custom connectors tab. We're going to create that brand new connector. And we've got some JSON over here, but we said we start from scratch. So we are going to delete this whole thing, right? Pretty scary, but don't worry. All I need to do right now is just open it up, open up curly brackets, open and close curly brackets. That's all you should have, right? So create the new connector, erase everything, and your editor should look something like this at this point if you're following along. So again, we're going to start with the metadata properties. These are the things that describe the connector in itself, and it focuses on kind of the name, the description, are kind of the main components of this. There is one other attribute in here, which is called schema, and this is just a version attribute. And because this schema will change over time as we continuously add features to custom connectors, and so this property just has a number there, and right now it's 1.0. It's basically static there. You don't have to do much with that. But again, all of these schema, these metadata attributes sit at the high level, at the root level properties of our connector. So in our case, this is what it might look like. And again, we're going to have the schema, version number, we'll have a name, the link. This is something that the user will see in the user interface, a link to go back to that reference back to the underlying application that is connecting to. That's optional. And then a description for it. Again, that's something that the user will see once they click on the little eye icon over there. So let's go ahead and add it into our editor. Go back over here to the editor, and we've got blank here with only curly brackets, and we'll just start typing. And as you notice, as you start typing here, the editor will want to autocomplete. You can hit tab and it'll complete it for you. So make sure you put commas in between these. So again, I'm going to give it a name. That. We'll add a link here just for fun. And then a description. And we'll put a comma here at the end, make sure that we continue the next one. All right, so this, if you're following along, it should look something like this. Very straightforward. And there's still some errors because this is still not a complete connector. And we'll start completely filling this out. All right, give you a couple of seconds to catch up. All right, so let's talk about the next portion here of the JSON for this custom connectors, which is the auth components. This one's going to be kind of fairly straightforward because there's not much to talk about at this point. Auth component really it's about providing the properties necessary for particular types of authentication. Different APIs have different types of authentication. Right now, the supported authentications that we have in here don't require anything here in the auth components. This is really much more for us to kind of start future-proofing custom connectors. But later on, once we have, say, auth 2.0 support, we'll start using this portion here of the JSON. But for our example here today, and for pretty much every connector you're going to be building in the near future, it should look something like this. It'll be auth components, and the type right now is none. Again, in the future, that type will change. It'll probably be auth2, and there'll be other attributes in here. But for today's example, right, we're not using that. It's going to be API key using the bearer type of authentication. So no special components are going to be required for this. So let's go ahead and add this into our custom connector. So again, autocomplete, I can hit tab, return will complete for me. This is an object, and inside there, the type is going to be none. And then exit out this object, and I'll put a comma here at the end. Get ready for the next attributes. So again, if you're following along, yours should look similar to this. Give a few seconds for you to catch up. All right, so let's go to the next one. Next, we've got required settings and auth fields. And the reason why we got these two together is because one belongs inside of the other. And right now it's basically the only attribute in there. So required settings is exactly what the name implies. It's what are the settings that are required to talk with this API. And right now there's only one attribute that's supported inside required settings. Again, a little bit more future proofing. There'll be other ones that'll be supported, but right now only one attribute is supported inside of the required settings, which is auth fields. And auth fields, it allows you to describe what are the input fields that you're going to be asking the end user to provide in order to authenticate with the API, right? And so you can see here the required, the auth field, sorry, is an array that allows you to specify, it's an array of objects, of JSON objects, that allows you to specify different properties like the label. What's the field label going to be there? The key, which is what's the name of that value when you send it over to the API, or how is it identified with the API itself? Description, there's error test. Mask is if you want those little dots to show up when the user's typing that information, right? If you want to obfuscate like maybe passwords or API keys, for example. And so there's several options over here that you can use. Again, you're going to add one object for every field that you want to present to the user to capture data. They can later on reference when you're talking to the API. Now, in our case, the only thing that we need is the API key, right? So we read from the documentation. So in our case, required settings and auth fields will look something like this. So we got required settings, it's an object. There's only one thing inside required settings, which is auth fields, and that is an array. And that array should have one object for every field that we are going to be creating for the user. Now we said we only needed one, so there's only one object in there. And we're only going to use just these four attributes. We don't need anything else here than that. We'll have a label. That's what we want the user to see for that field. The key, which is how that is identified for the API. Description, and then the masked attribute is true. Again, it's going to show up as little dots in there. You can play around with that. You can put false if you want to, but since an API key, it's something that you kind of want to keep secret, so we'll do that. So let's go over here, back to the editor, and then let's type those in here. And again, if you're following along here with us, so we'll go here to required settings, right? It's one object, and in here there's one attribute. It's auth fields, which is an array. Open that for me. We're going to create a new object with curly brackets, and then we're going to start typing here label. And this is just API keys. So you can put anything you want here. This is just text that the user is going to see. And then the key, and this one should map to what the API is asking for, and I think they call it like this, API underscore key. And then a description, again, this is whatever you want here. This will be something that the user will see. We'll keep it simple here today. And then here for the masked, again, you can put anything you want there. I'll put it true there so you can see little dots. And then we'll end this here with a comma to make it ready for the next things we're going to be adding. So once again, if you're following along, your editor should look something like this. Keep it there. All right, so let's move on to the next attribute, which is auth request. So at this point, we've already asked the user for the information that we need to authenticate. So now we need to describe how we're going to send this information over to the API. And that's what auth request is, right? What is the request that we're going to be making to the API? What does that look like? How do we describe that? So the auth request is an object that allows us to describe how do we make that request to the API. And so it has a couple of properties in here. There's the type, and that is what type of authentication does this API use? And you can see there's different types over there. There's basic auth, there's bearer, custom body, there's custom header, and some other ones like that. And as we continuously add new authentication types, you'll see those be added in there. Now, again, there's type in there. There's some error message, token, headers, and a bunch of other properties in here. We'll not go over them, but you see that all the different properties that we might need that might be associated with different types of the authorization. So some of these are very specific to an authorization type, like username and password are basically only used for basic authentication. Right? Now, back to our documentation, right? For the API, we're talking about OpenAI. Remember that it uses an API key, and remember that it had the authorization bearer. So this is a bearer type of authentication. It's very common, and so we already have a type for that. And that's great because that means we can describe that to Connect and let Connect figure out all the things that it has to do, any of the formatting, any crazy things, and writing this this header in the way it's supposed to. And we can just focus on the integration itself. So in our particular case, this is all that we have to do. So we just have to, we'll create an auth request. We'll say that the type of the request is going to be bearer. And then we have to send the API key, right? So that's the token attribute. Now we've already asked the user for the API key. Remember in auth fields, we created a field for the user to provide the API. So this is how we reference that information back. So we use these double curly brackets. This is called handlebar notation, and it allows us to reference to other objects inside of our definition. So here we're saying that the token, the data for the token, right, the value is going to come from the API underscore key attribute that's inside of auth fields, right? So you got double quotes, then double curly brackets, and then we give the path to where that data is going to come from. So let's go back to our editor and write that in there. So here, auth request, and it's a type. And you'll see how it automatically gives me a list. I'm just going to choose bearer. And then for the token, I'm going to double curly bracket. I'm going to open that up over here. And then we said it's going to come from auth fields and then API underscore key. And I have to write this last part. The API underscore key has to match the key name I gave in the required settings, right? And the auth fields in there, right? So it has to match this. If I had written it in a different way, then over here, when I do here, the reference in auth request, it should have been different. Right? So they have to match. All right, so again, if you're following along, yours should look something like this. Pause there for a second. All right, so now let's talk about the endpoints. These are the different resources that we're going to be calling, right? These are the URLs, the endpoints that we're going to be hitting in the API. And so in custom connectors, we have to declare the endpoints before we start using them. So we have to kind of define them, if you will, right? And so we do that through a special object called endpoints. So endpoints, again, it's an object that specifies the HTTP method for each one of the endpoints, because you can have one endpoint that is called both, that's called in multiple methods. So you'll describe them separately, both for any of the methods that you have in there. But it's a fairly straightforward object, right? Endpoint, and then for each one of the methods, you'll create a brand new object. So say, for example, for get, for post, you'll create separate objects in there, and in each one of those, you'll describe that endpoint. And you'll start by putting the path to the endpoint. So normally an endpoint for an API, for all the different endpoints, they have the same base URL, the beginning of the URL is usually the same for every single one of the endpoints of your API, which might have hundreds of endpoints, but usually the beginning of that URL is almost exactly the same. We normally refer to that as the base URL. So that's the portion that normally doesn't change. And there's stuff that changes at the end of the URL that's called the path, or the actual endpoints, the resource of that. So we split those up here in custom connectors, and we'll have the path separate, and then that URL attribute is referring to that base URL. So in our case, there are two endpoints that we're going to be calling. We're going to be calling this models one, and the reason we're going to do that is that this is the one that they were using as an example on how to kind of make a simple call to the API, and we're going to use that to test the API. So we're going to do a get call to the models one, and then the post one is the action that we want to do. So these are the two endpoints that our custom connector is going to be talking to. So we'll break that down, and then our endpoints object will look something like this. So you'll notice that there's inside of endpoints, there are two objects, one for get, one for post. Inside of get, there's the models one. So again, /model is just that's the variable part. That's the part that changes. And then in there, we've got an object with an URL attribute, which has that base URL. And that base URL should end with a /. It's a little thing to keep track of. And then again, we have another one for post, and that one has the completions endpoint that we're later on going to use for the action. Right? So again, we've got the path, and then we've got the base URL. And this later on is going to help us, and it pays off a lot of dividends when we do this work over here. So let's go back to our editor and put in our endpoints. So we'll start here, choose endpoints. Again, it's one object in here, and it gives me already the options. I'll choose get, just start with the get one. And then the path for this one is going to be models, and in here, just one attribute for now, which is going to be the URL. And this is our base URL. I'm going to end up with a /. And then I'm going to do the same here for post to create the one for completions. Yep. Completions. Yep. All right, and same thing, URL. That is the exact same URL. There, and let's put the comma here, just get it ready for the next. And once again, if you're following along, yours should look something like this at this point. All right. A couple of seconds. All right. So let's go to the next one, which is test connection. So this does exactly what the name implies. This allows us to specify how do we want to test the connection. So you know that when you're adding a connector and you put in your credentials, you have an option in Claris Connect to test it. And this is how we're going to tell Claris Connect what call are we going to make in order to test that connection. So this object again specifies what is the call, what is the request that Claris Connect should make to the API to test that connection, make sure everything is okay. And inside this object, there are just a couple of properties in there. There's the endpoint. Again, it's going to be a reference to what we just created. We'll see that. We can add some parameters in there and specify the method and body if we want to send any data over there. But it should be fairly straightforward. But it's any request that we want to put in here. And the only thing that Claris Connect, the only requirement is that this call should return a 200. So if the call returns a 200, Claris Connect considers this a successful test, right? So for our case, it's actually pretty straightforward. Test connection, we're going to be calling the models endpoint, which is what we said. And its method's going to be get. And this is where, right, declaring those endpoints starts paying out. I don't have to write the entire URL. All I have to do is reference it here by calling and say, hey, this is the endpoint that I want that I've already declared in the endpoints attribute called models, and I'll be using the method get. That's it. So that's all we have to do. And this powers the entire testing inside of Connect. So go back here to our editor. Do test connection. Here, it's going to be just two things with endpoint. So / models. And then the method here is get. And we'll put a comma here at the end. Again, if you're following along, this is what it should look like, or something like it. All right, let's get to the fun part. Let's declare the actions. Okay, so the actions attribute here does exactly what the name implies, right? This is where we specify all the different actions that our connector is going to have. And in actions, there's kind of two sections over here for each action. There's kind of the high-level attributes, right, that describe what the name is going to be and what the endpoint is going to be. And then we've got in there we have the auth fields and URL fields. There's the same thing. But auth fields and action fields allow us to describe what are the fields that the user is going to be able to provide information for each one of these actions, right? So that is an array inside of actions. For each one of the actions, we'll have it in there. So in our case, we're only going to do one action. we only had an action in there, so it should be really straightforward. So the way we're going to do is we're going to declare here is an action. And there's a couple of attributes in here. The model ID and action ID are just identifiers for the action. They work in concert, so you can put anything you want in there. They're string values, as long as that the combination of the two are unique. You could put anything you want there. So I like to kind of use a verb in model ID and then a noun in the action ID, but you can do whatever you want as long as, again, the combination of the two are unique. So that identifies the action. Then the endpoint, just like we did with test action, all we have to do is a reference to the endpoint that we declared in the endpoints attribute. So in this case, we're going to be calling the completions endpoint, and the method we said is going to be a post, right? We read that from the documentation. Then the label is going to be, right, what we want that to show up in the UI. In this case, we're just going to give that name, create a completion. And then the help text, which is just a description of that, so the user is going to see that. Now that's our action kind of at a high level. Those are the kind of the meta data fields for the action. Now, we do want some parameters for this action. We said we wanted 3 parameters. So let's see what that looks like. So in here we declare the actions field inside, it's an attribute inside of the actions. And then for each one of them, for each one of the fields that we want, we say we wanted 3, this is an array, we have a little object inside there. So for the first one, which is model, we're going to be using the key is exactly how the API identifies this parameter. And reading from the documentation, right, it was just model, all lowercase. Label is what we want the user to see for that field. That's the label for the field. Description, self-explanatory. And then we said that the type for this was string, and then this was a required field, right? Model was required. So that's the first object that we're going to have here in the actions field. Right? The next field that we said we wanted was the prompt, right? Both of these are required. So very similar to the previous one. The key here is prompt. That comes from the documentation. That's exactly how the API identifies this. The label that we want the user to see is prompt. There's a description, the type, and again, this was required because required is true. And the last field that we said we were going to put there, which was optional, which is max tokens, right? That's the key. You see, again, matches. It needs to match to what the API says. The label, what the user is going to see. We got a description. The type, in this case, is going to be number. Right? It's not a string, it's a number. And then in this case, the required is false. This is an optional value for the end user. So if you put them all these together, right, it looks like this. This is the object. It's a little small, but we'll walk through this really quickly. But tick all together, right? This one action with all these fields together, right? This is what it looks like. It's one object. All right, so let's go into the editor and add these in ourselves. So again, it's actions. Actions is the array. And we'll start here with our first and only object. Then in here, we've got, we'll do model ID. Again, you can put anything you want in here, as long as they become unique. Action ID, again, same thing. Use that. And then the endpoint, right? It's going to say / completions that we've declared in our endpoints before. And then the method for this, we said it's a post. And again, this needs to match what we had previously put in here and declared in the endpoints object. The label for this, whatever we want, just keep it straightforward here. In this case, we'll just create completion. Quick description, the user will see, or prompt. And then let's start with the action field. So the action field, again, it's an array. It's going to have 3 objects. So we'll start with the first one. Open here curly brackets. And then the key for the first one, we said is going to be models. The model, sorry. Label. Keep it simple here. On to description. Something pretty straightforward. The type, we said this is going to be string. Type. if I could only get this right. Sorry. There you go. Mistakes. Okay. And then this required, we said it's going to be true, right? This is one of the required fields. I'm going to drop over here, put a comma, and then open up the next one for the next field, which is prompt. And then label, very straightforward. Not complicate things, description, prompt for the completion. All right, we said the type is also a string. And then this is also required. So we'll put true here. Required. Right? And then so our last one here, key. This is max underscore tokens. Right? This matches the API. Quick label. Quick description here for this field. And then the type, we said it's a number. And then required, we said it's gonna be false because it's optional. Very good. All right, so if you following along, this is what it should look like. Should have something like this. Give you a couple seconds to catch up. All right, and if you follow along, you've got here in the same place, we're done. We can actually test out. You should have no more errors. Just give it a couple seconds sometimes, but it should be fine. And you can click on Save and Test. And the API key number 2 is the API key for this. So if you click here on Test Authentication, use that API key number 2, the API number 2, and yeah, we should get a response. It's a call to the models endpoint, we said. And then if we can test the action in here for the model, you can put either text DaVinci -002, or you can put in the one that shared in the chat. Either one should work. And then put anything you want here in the prompt. And if everything worked out okay, you get a response back. And if you feel comfortable with it, click on Publish. And your connector should show up over here in the Custom Connectors tab. As a finished connector. It's awesome. So if you follow along, congratulations, you've built 2 connectors here today. If you didn't, still okay. I hope that that just at least watching through this, I hope you get a better understanding of how custom connectors work and how you can go about creating your own connectors. Again, you can start from one of the templates. You can use one of those. You can use them as is, or you can make modifications to those as a great starting point, right? To make your own versions of those connectors or connectors for other APIs. So great. So I am going to see if there's some questions here at chat. Let's see if we have we've got a couple of minutes to answer some questions. And yeah. Let's see.
Thanks, Ronnie. So there are a couple questions. I think we'll start with, is there a way to provide comments on the JSON or on the connector?
That's a good question. Right now, no. Not explicitly, no, that there isn't, but I love that idea. I'll bring it back to the engineers. I love that one. Thank you so much.
All right, here's another that may be more of a future request than
Yeah.
something possible now.
Mhm.
Is there a way to save the test settings while keeping the connector in draft?
Ah, no, and to be honest, that was actually by design, and the idea is that we don't want to keep those credentials in there, just a security precaution more than anything else. At least that's what our initial intention was. But I'd love to hear more about the use case, and if it makes sense, I think we should. I think it's a great future feature. Right?
Someone actually, this came up in the middle, and I'm not sure if it was resolved or not, but one participant said he did not see error checking while typing like you did. Any
Oh,
ideas?
really? No, no, that should be. Yeah, it's kind of odd. Let's check in later and see if that maybe there was, yeah. The only time I've seen that not happen if that was having internet issues, but it should not. So let's I'd love to like reconnect later and see if that continues to happen. And if it's a bug, let's try to fix it.
All right, and I think the last one that I see, you answered, but just wanted to confirm. Does
Mhm.
custom connectors support OAuth 2.0 specifically, mainly for Google APIs?
We are actually testing it right now. So the engineers finished the work. I don't like to talk about future features, but this is one that is extremely important for the future of this feature. So we are right now testing it, and so I'm hoping that we can be able to release it soon. So stay tuned.
All
Yeah,
right,
and I agree. It's something that's very, it's a very common authentication method. So
and that's all the questions I see. Thanks, everybody. I hope you successfully created the connector or downloaded the finished example. If you were not able to get it, feel free to drop an email to me or Ronnie, and we can share the link with you. So once again, have a great day, and thanks for joining us.
thanks, everybody.